Hello and welcome to Erickson Live. Do you have somebody in your life who has been going through trauma or is going through trauma? How do you recognize that? How can you show up to support them? What tools might you be able to add to your coaching toolbox, to your coaching tool belt, in order to be the best support possible that they can lean on? All that and more we're going to be discussing today with two experts in trauma-informed coaching. So, without further ado, we have Brad Hardie and Susan Hogarth on the show. Both have started a company named Moving the Human Spirit. A little bit about them both. Susan is an intuitive life and trauma informed coach committed to uniting people through their core values and igniting change from within. She has worked with individuals and families who have experienced traumatic events. Susan specializes in the areas of families in crisis, creating healthy relationships, and parents of gifted and at risk youth. Susan has in-depth training in PTSD and trauma and understands both personally and professionally how trauma can impact one's quality of life. She holds certifications in coaching with the ICF, trauma intervention, and introduction to PTSD through McGill University. Susan is an experienced marriage, family, and relationship coach with a consistent track record of successfully helping others learn, grow, and develop new skills to reach their desired goals. So that's Susan. Brad Hardie. Brad has earned a reputation as one of the best mentors and life coaches as a result of his intuitive talent to connect deeply with anyone in a matter of minutes. He guides his clients with an interactive process of exploration of thoughts, feelings, and behavior for the purpose of problem solving and achieving higher levels of functioning. He uses structural influence to achieve best result scenarios for growth and advancement with an aim to increase the individual's sense of their own well-being. Um, Brad employs a range of techniques based on experiential relationship building, dialogue, communication, and behavioral change that are designed to improve the mental health of a client or patient and to improve group relationships. So that could be within a corporation or a family, for example. Brad continues to contribute to the well being and self improvement of numerous individuals and businesses. He's further refining his work on managing chaos and human development, chaos with a capital C, so you know it's serious. And Brad is a distinctive aid in the future of personal human growth and the human aspect of business system management. Well, welcome, guys. Welcome, Brad. Welcome, Susan. We're so glad to have you today.
Thank you. Pleasure to be
Thanks,
here.
Fabian. We're thrilled to be here for sure.
Yeah, great. So we already have people saying hello. We have Rafael, or Rafal, um, from Poland and Uganda. He's joining us. We have Laura joining us from Nairobi, Kenya. Eddie doesn't say where he's from, but he's at least happy to be here, so that's great. So, everybody, let us know where you are joining us from. We just love to, show off what a great international community we have. And why don't we start off with that? Susan, where are you joining us from?
Sure, I'm actually just outside of Vancouver, British Columbia. Born and raised here whole life.
Okay, wonderful. And Vancouver, there's a lot of Ericksonians up there. Um, then we have Sabine or Sabine joining us from Beirut, Julie from Kazakhstan, and Guy from Ireland is also chiming in and telling us where he's from. Brad, what about you?
I am on the Sunshine Coast in British Columbia, up towards a place called Seashell in Sandy Hook. So I'm enjoying the West Coast weather today. It's snowing lately, which is rare for us, but yeah, I'm here very close to the water and enjoying a bit.
Okay, wonderful. I can actually see the snow in your background. If you look like to the left over there on Brad's screen, you can see the little snowflakes making an appearance. That's really nice, actually. Okay, we also have Ella from San Francisco, Joanna from Warsaw in Poland. We have Naila also from Beirut. Thank you for joining. Pascal from Gatineau in Quebec. So very, and a LinkedIn user who's unidentified from Toronto in Canada, so from the East Coast. So very nice to have all of you with us today. Um, all right, so we are talking about trauma-informed coaching. And I think, first of all, it's probably helpful for people who don't have that background, such as myself, to understand a little better what is trauma. I know we use it in our day-to-day speech. Maybe, oh man, that run to the supermarket market was pre-traumatic. The cashier was really full or something like that. I'm guessing that's not how you would use it.
Hmm. So, if I may, I can take this one. Trauma is usually described as something that is deeply distressing or disturbing as an experience. And we do hear it used quite a bit. And that is something that some people refer to small t's and big t's, which is small traumas and big traumas. In our work, we see all trauma as being the same for people. What they experience, of course, is trauma, so we don't try to see if it, or talk about it as being small or large. But yes, it is a deeply distressing and disturbing event that exists, and it's out of the ordinary. So they do happen, but it's usually something that we do not expect.
Right.
Hmm.
And it's something also to, um, you know, uh, uh, for an example, I could be with Brad somewhere and something might happen and it might be a traumatic event for him, but not necessarily for me. So it all comes back to that social, economical, many kind of factors that factor into what will create a traumatic event for yourself opposed to somebody else.
Right. So there's not an objective kind of set of circumstances that will result in a trauma. It's the way that an individual perceives it and how they are impacted by certain circumstances, and the same set of circumstances might be very traumatic for one person but not at all for another person.
Yeah, and then sometimes it might be at one event that will create the traumatic event, and in other cases it might be several events that might create something that will become a traumatic experience.
Okay, so something that might build on top of each other, where each component isn't necessarily reaching up to be traumatic, but in the sum, as they accumulate, that together constitutes a trauma. Is that correct?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, interesting. Um, so actually, in the chat, I wanted to have us a little bit of an understanding of what trauma is before I ask you this question. Everybody that's watching, let us know why talking about trauma, why learning about trauma is important to you. Is it because you have somebody in your life? Obviously, you don't have to share exact details, but what are you hoping to take away from today? What can we, especially hone in on so that you're leaving with exactly what it is that you came for? And while people are writing that in the chat, Brad, what is it about trauma informed coaching, or what is it about the broader subject of trauma that is important to you, that has led you to wanting to focus on that and work with that?
Um, well, I think for me personally, I've done a lot of work in stress and chaos management, and I've done a lot of work around traumatic events that have challenged clients, be it getting them stuck and trying to get them unstuck, moving them through false belief systems that they may have um, either been told as they were young or they bring with them now that they are aged, and they hold on to these things. So for me to be able to explore some of what has gone on, and it not about going to the past and figuring out what has happened, but more about really having a look at what holds them back from participating in their life and having the best life that they can have. And a lot of times what we see when we work with trauma within trauma coaching is that we will spend a great deal of time trying to bring the client to the here and now of what coaching is. So some of the ways that we look at this when we are talking about resilience is that we have to have an awareness that trauma is present, and then recovery or resilience starts after that. And one of the ways that we can contribute to that is that we start helping build a safe place for our clients to explore what are some of the things that may be holding them back as far as emotion, um, belief, and what values might they need to check in on and change to then live more freely in the here and now and move forward in their future feeling resilient and strong as they go down that pathway. A lot of the time it's because their trust has been shattered, and what we do as coaches is assist them in rebuilding that trust. So creating safe spaces, building trust, and it's something that is important in trauma coaching because they can have lost trust not only in other people but also themselves, and that can create a great deal of fear of the unknown, again, distrust in people, but also dissociation from their life and their world in general. So we coach around those things in trauma coaching to assist them in becoming much more living their lives in the here and now, and to be able to feel trust and safety within these moments.
Okay, so reconnecting with their life, having the trust, having the safety. You said it starts with having the awareness that there is a trauma, right? I expect that goes for both the client and the coach. How do you, as the coach, realize, or what might be some telltale signs that I might be dealing with trauma? If, for example, if of course the client isn't signing up for trauma-informed coaching, right? But if I'm working with a client under a standard, let's say, coaching arrangement, what might be some
Yeah.
signs that trauma is playing a role?
So some of the things that we identify if we're working with clients and we believe that there may be trauma, given given the guideline that we are not here to diagnose or treat trauma, but the signs that show up can be some severe being severely stuck. There can be moments when we will invite people to look at something, say, relive a piece of your life to draw out the joy or the strength that was in that part of your life. The client may have complete blocks of time that they can't recall. There can be a reoccurrence through each session that seems to come up. It's in language. We'll hear language sometimes around trauma. Clients will have language around not being enough. They don't know who authentic self is, and they don't have values that are deeply anchored. And as a result of that, we can start, interestingly, excavating for moral injury. And what I mean by that is that we start becoming really curious and we seek to understand what are some of the underlying things that might be preventing them from moving forward in the session, but also in their life. The other thing that we can see a lot of the time that gives us question of whether or not maybe trauma plays a part is pattern repeating or unacceptable behavior in their life. And sometimes that is another indicator that there could have been trauma at some point. And sometimes the client might not be aware of that, and we're not going to take them to that place. But if we get curious and ask questions, we can see a pattern forming around whether or not trauma may have played a role. And if it has, then how do we move them past that? How do we correct some of the story, i.e. make sense of it for them and move them forward in a productive, resilient way?
Yeah. A few other things too that I could just add to that as well is, a lot of trauma clients will live in a dissociated state instead of an associated state. And just seeing anxiety around certain topics and that will support the coach in that as well to kind of decipher these areas.
And what does that mean for somebody who hasn't heard the words associated and dissociated yet? What's the difference there?
Somebody that really is dissociated is kind of looking at the world from an outside space, and somebody that is associated is looking from like that internal space out.
Mm-hmm. And would it be correct to say that if I'm in an associated state, I feel emotions more strongly, whereas dissociated, everything is either muted or I'm not really feeling it, I'm disconnected from it?
Definitely, right? So when you're associated, you're feeling it within the body, and when you're dissociating it, it's kind of like you're looking at it from a lens. So, and lots of times when we're doing trauma work, we do look at that from a dissociated state so that somebody doesn't associate with that, with that event or that. And when the positive intentions and that come in and those positive states come in, those are the pieces that we want to associate back into the body.
Got it. All right. Thank you. So if somebody, and as far as I'm aware, and like you were just saying, there is a time and a place, and there is a really strong use case for looking at a world from a dissociated space, right? It's just if it always is kind of the default fallback, I can't even go into association, that then it becomes something to be curious about and to look into and to discuss and to explore, right?
Exactly. Brad talks about this, and I talk about this a lot too. As a trauma-informed coach, it's about being able to shine the flashlight into those dark spaces, right, or into the shadows that stop the client from moving forward.
Yeah. Okay, so Sabina is saying that what she would really like to get from the stream today is she would like to understand trauma in order not to disregard it or neglect it, for not recognizing it and thus causing more harm. And I, it's a bit of weird way of asking the question, but what is something, that we should definitely avoid? What is kind of the worst thing that we can do if we have somebody that might have been going or is going through trauma? What is something that if we have a suspicion or if we have, some indications, what is something that we should absolutely avoid? Brad, maybe for you.
What should we absolutely avoid? That's a really good question. I think I would absolutely avoid being fearful of asking questions around it.
Mhm.
So if someone is suffering or they have this thing that keeps presenting itself, then I think in a concept of being able to serve our clients the best, that we have to be as good coaches, be able to ask some hard questions. And if we're seeing a pattern of misbeliefs or their perception that maybe you know, of course they hold their perception as truth, but if we see some of them that really are not the way that they should be, then I would be really curious about whether it is truth or just a story. So I think the one thing that we should avoid as trauma-informed coaches is ask to not ask those questions. We should ask those questions. We should bring those ideas forward, because whether something happens about it or not, at least your client will know that you are not frightened by the experience of trauma, and that if they need it, they could speak about anything freely. And I think as a good coach, we want to hold a space where our clients can feel safe and that they can talk to us. And that's co-creating that relationship with our clients. If I suddenly steer away from, let's say, the elephant in the room or something that my client is desperately trying to bring out into the open, then I'd be curious if I'm actually doing them a service. So yeah, the one thing that you want to avoid being frightened to ask the tough questions. So that would be my advice. And yeah.
Thank you. So it's not trauma is not something where we want to be super gentle with the person and we just want to kind of avoid upsetting them, that sort of thing. That there is a case to be made for helping them explore what's going on and gaining that self-awareness. I'm just backtracking
Mhm.
so to see if I understand correctly.
Yeah, I think, bearing in mind that, again, as coaches, we don't deal a lot with the past. But what we can see is we can honor the imprints that happened in trauma. So when I work with clients, I don't need to know what happened to them, but I honor that something did. So we're taking the client as a whole where they are, and we're taking them within that moment, complete as they are. And what that means is that if they have these things that are impacting them, that we honor that. We don't ignore it as part of them. So there's there is a balance and trust when we work with trauma clients, because again, as I was saying earlier, their safety is shaken, their trust may be shaken, and that can come out in very different ways. And so yeah, what we want to do is um, really be curious. Again, I use that word a lot, but for me, it's like, let's be curious about what's coming up for them. And they might want to share something. Maybe they want us to bear witness to something, but I always let the client know that it's unimportant to me. All I'm curious about is, why is this thing keep presenting itself, and what might we do to move past it. So if the same behaviors and the same comments are being repeated, then that is someone trying to tell me something. And as a coach, we are always listening for what the client is saying. And if we, of course, we use nuances and our techniques depending on what coach or how we coach. But it's like, if we get really curious about what's going on for the client and we sense that there might be something happening, then I might not say, I sense there's trauma, because that's me diagnosing or it's suggesting that that might be there. I would say, I'm really curious about this thing that I've heard you say 3 or 4 times, or I'm really curious about those emotions or feelings that you have when we go into this conversation here. Is there something there that we need to bring to the here and now and work through to push us forward to a more resilient life as you move into the next piece of the coaching session? So it's a curiosity, and it's about not avoiding those things. I think a lot of us, we fear what might happen if we bring up mental health or trauma. And the reality is that I fear more when we don't. I would rather the person be who they are in the moment instead of pretending to be okay, because that is not authentically who they are in those moments. So we sit in some very interesting places and we hold some very interesting space. But that's the passion of trauma work, at least for me.
Yeah, I think I'm
And I
starting
think,
to get a feel for it. Sorry, Susan, if I could just
yeah,
kind of think out loud to see if I understand correctly and help everybody work through it, because there's so much in what you just said, Brad. And you mentioned the word nuance, and I think that's probably the key is this nuanced, um, yeah, holding that right balance, right? Because you said we don't delve into what was going on, what caused the trauma, what, like, take me back to it, and what did it feel like. We don't ask any of those questions for reasons that Susan was stating. um, but at the same time, we honor that it is happening. We are helping them acknowledge that something is not okay, and something not being okay is okay. I'm taking from what it is you're saying, right? And my words now, that doesn't reflect on them as a person. That doesn't mean they're a terrible employee or a terrible mother or whatever, but it's just something that is the present right now. And then how do we go forward? What's going on that keeps coming up, and how can we go from the situation that is the way it is? No use denying it, no use trying to change it, trying to what is it, whitewash, greenwash, trying to delude yourself, but accepting the situation as it is and moving towards whatever the client wants. Is that fair?
yeah,
Yeah, and if
absolutely. And
if
I think,
clients are coming to us for real change, and we're the coaches that create the change, then change looks different in all different areas. So the reality is again, if we always hold them as complete and move them forward, we have to get curious about these things. And really, my belief is that we'll see a lot more of it. A lot of people are having very difficult time with the global pandemic that is on right now,
Yeah.
which is creating a great deal of discomfort for them. And
Before we go there,
it's
actually,
better if,
sorry to
yeah,
cut you off, but before we
no
go there,
worries.
I wanted to throw it to Susan, just because we've been we've been talking over you
Oh
for a
yeah.
while, and I just wanted to see what you want to add, and we'll come back to COVID because that is a question in the chat, and we'll definitely want to talk about that. So go for it,
well, I
Susan.
think
What
it's
what
just
was it?
important to know that, as solution focused coaches, um, just building on what Brad had talked about, these traumatic events and that have happened, and not having to go back into them, but understanding that there is strengths within the person that they've adapted in some way. And usually they don't see that in themselves. They only see the negative. So if we can start to pull the positive out and then move them forward with those positive aspects of their life as they move forward, then they start to see it, and they start to see the repetition that is happening. So they don't get stuck. They don't get or they well again maybe they get unstuck.
Yeah.
It's just important to understand that there are always a positive side to the negative, and so not to look at the negative, but to flip that.
So there can be. So that reminds me a little bit of Stoic philosophy, if you indulge me for 1 second, where the Stoics hold that um, every every bad thing that happens to me is a test by the gods, preparing me for even tougher challenges and kind of helping me steel myself and becoming an even better human being. Is that, you know, related to what
I,
what you're
I
saying?
I think so. I mean, I just think about my own story and why I became a trauma, informed coach. And it goes back many, many years. But, it was always the negative aspect that I kept kind of pushing down on myself. And when it became a positive aspect, and then realizing that there were so many other people out there that I could help, and kind of I walk them through it or pull them through it or ask open-ended questions so that they come through it themselves. I think this is why most people become trauma-informed coaches. Actually, that's not. This is why. I know that's why. I do the enrollment for the courses, and I have this conversation every single day. And the important thing for people that have gone through trauma not themselves is the fact that they want to help other people. That is what gives them their passion and their purpose in life. And it makes them have an understanding of why this event or these events that might have occurred in their life is to bring them to a point.
Mm. Do you think that a trauma-informed coach needs to have experienced trauma themselves, either on their own person or within their close vicinity, to be a good trauma-informed coach?
I don't think so, but I do believe that most of the clients the students that come to us and that for trauma informed coaching, they have experienced traumatic events, and so they're able to speak to it from experience, and that's one thing that will kind of set them apart from somebody that has not experienced trauma. So, and then there's lots of niche markets within trauma itself.
Got it. Okay. So it can be a strong motivation, but it's not, a necessary requirement in order um, to start in that field. Got it.
No, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Brad, coming back towards COVID, Eddie is asking, I would like to ask the panel what trauma situations have grown in the times of COVID. Has it changed in any way to what trauma was pre-COVID? For example, I see trauma situations in lockdowns.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that happened, pardon me, with the COVID itself. One of the things that we're seeing is a lot more trauma, obviously, with medical staff. They're becoming quite traumatized with having so much loss. It's not an acute trauma, it's more like um, they're looking at this chronic, repeated event happening, and that's becoming quite difficult for them to deal with. The other thing that we've been seeing a lot more of with this particular pandemic is that because it is a locked down, if you will, we see a lot more abuse. So that can be domestic abuse or child abuse within the family because the children are home all the time now. The routines are not regular when it comes um, to having breaks from each other anymore. We're all in one environment. So we're seeing a lot more of that. The general anxiety that we experience in the world now, it's sort of I had a few clients that refer to it as this heaviness that they are experiencing all the time. So that's an interesting thing. And of course, when we're under that heavy weight of emotion and stress and anxiety, again, not knowing what's going to happen, certainly being attentive to what we hear in the news and what have you. But so, COVID, I believe, I don't think there's a better time for people to pursue wanting to investigate the nuances of trauma-informed coaching than now, because we're going to be presented with a lot of people trying to manage their stress levels and their anxiety around this particular virus.
And I would imagine that it doesn't end when we're all vaccinated and all happily.
It can come out at any time. We've had people can live a life for quite a while and then suddenly have be evoked or have a memory that brings them back to moments when they felt unsafe, and it can be quite they don't know it's coming. So do I think that we'll have a bit of that moving forward? I think it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how family systems now work. If they become closer as a result of it because of the fear of becoming infected, if they become if we're more frightened by other people that we don't know per se. So, and I'm not saying I know what that's going to look like, but I do think that if we start experiencing some of the fallout of things such as pandemics, that we're going to need to be able to assist people. And I'm not sure that the medical world completely is able to help the number of people in the world that's going to need help. So I think working in unison with them, psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, and becoming also an assist with the struggles that people have is going to be a very important thing after this particular pandemic.
Yeah. I work alongside my family doctor, actually. So there's been plenty of times when she has felt that somebody doesn't necessarily need to see a counselor or a psychologist, but seeing somebody that is a life coach or a trauma-informed coach is beneficial. So that's been a great relationship to have.
That is a very interesting dynamic, I feel. So let's get into that, maybe even a little bit more. So what can trauma-informed coaching offer that, a medical professional or a psychologist can't? And Brad, you already mentioned that there will be a lot of work around it, so there might just not be enough people. And beyond that, what does a coach bring, and what can a coach complement that that enriches that interaction that a patient or a client has with their psychologist or family doctor or what have you?
Yeah. Well, if we're familiar with, we do a great deal of work with post-traumatic stress disorder, and that requires a diagnosis before we receive any clients. And that is done through psychologists, psychiatrists, or family doctors. And a lot of the time, what happens before when they come to us, they've already gone through programs of looking into the past and dissecting the past and um, exposure therapy and different things. As a trauma-informed coach, what we do is we take them from the here and now and move them forward in a solution-focused way. So what we're doing is, because we don't go necessarily to the past, the only time that we step into the past is if there's a strength that we want to bring forward with the client, that there's something that it's like you've made it this far, what strength was there that helped you get to where you are today? And then we move them forward in vision and in focus to be able to change who they were to who they want to become, so to speak. So we are looking at behavioral and behavioral changes and things that, not saying that the other professionals cannot do that work, but we're able to do it in a different way, and certainly in a manner that is very